So there's this open letter which has been signed by a bunch of people claiming that accusing Israel of genocide constitutes a blood libel. Some of the initial signatories are the Israeli journalist Yossi Klein Halevi, Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg, Rabbi Shmuley Yankelovich. I mention them in particular because part of what is so depressing to me, dispiriting to me about this letter is that these are people who, in other aspects of their lives, I actually think are really, really talented and thoughtful people. I mean, Yossi Klein Halevi, I disagree with his political views, but he's a very talented narrative journalist. If you read books of his, like, We Were Like Dreamers about the Israeli soldiers in the 1967 war and what happened to them. Yitzhak Greenberg is one of the most important American rabbis of his generation, really a giant in the kind of field of post-Holocaust theology who shaped, whole generations of Orthodox American Jews. Shmuley Yankelovich, who's based in the United States, runs an Orthodox organization that in domestic American politics on questions of the rights of immigrants, on opposing ICE, has actually done some really, really, wonderful, wonderful work. And so this letter to me is a kind of an example of how there's something about this question, about the question of Israel and the Palestinians that I think takes people's best qualities, their qualities of intellectual curiosity and their qualities of empathy, and it kind of drains them. Um, and this letter, I think, is a specimen of what has happened to establishment American Jewish and Israeli discourse. And I just want to explain why I find it so dispiriting. The first point is, if you wanted to write an intellectually and morally honest letter opposing the claim that Israel has committed genocide. And to be fair, genocide is a very particular kind of war of crime, right? It's different than crimes against humanity, for instance, right? Genocide has to do with intent. One could make an intellectually honest argument that Israel has not met the standard of genocide. But to be intellectually honest, you would have to start by acknowledging what Israel actually has done, right? That whatever term you claim it meets under international law, just talk about the brute fact of what has happened on the ground, right? We have the best scholars we have in terms of estimating direct and indirect deaths from war now suggest that Israel has killed 100,000 Palestinians in Gaza. Let's remember, Gaza is not a big place, right? It's only a bit more than 2 million people. 100,000 people, right? The Gaza has the largest population of child amputees per capita of any place in the world. That 80% of the homes have been destroyed. That 70% of farmland has been destroyed. And the reconstruction is not happening, right? In fact, what's actually happened is Israel has cut the Gaza Strip in half and now confined people in Gaza in this completely destroyed area. Where there's no concrete coming in to actually rebuild homes. Israel has basically confined that population into only now half of the Gaza Strip. So if you want to argue this is a genocide, okay, but at least ask yourself what the human cost has been, right? There's nothing in this open letter which does that at all. This is the closest you get. This is the closest you get. I'm going to read the sentence. It says, there is a vigorous debate within the Jewish community over aspects of how this war was fought, and that is a sign of moral health. So is our pain over every innocent life lost. So you notice the only acknowledgement of any Palestinian death and suffering at all is turned into a kind of self-congratulatory claim about Jews that actually Jews are so moral because we are pained by this, right? And because we're having a debate about it, right? So it's actually, to me, the very opposite of a kind of moral reckoning with what's happening, which I think, again, to be honest, in arguing against genocide, you would have to have some human reckoning with what actually Israel has done, even if you want to say it shouldn't be called genocide. The second thing that's so dishonest about this open letter is that intellectually honest arguments acknowledge the arguments and face the arguments of people on the other side and try to respond to them, right? This letter does not acknowledge that among the groups that have said Israel is committing genocide are Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, an Israeli human rights organization, Physicians for Human Rights, the International Association of Genocide Scholars, right? He doesn't acknowledge any of that. It doesn't actually answer their arguments, which have been documented, hundreds and hundreds of pages of reports from on the ground reporting from people, in Gaza. Um, and in fact, what's even more remarkable is that the authors of the letter claim that Israel has not committed genocide, but that Hamas was trying to commit a genocide. And to support that claim, they link to an essay written by a scholar that was posted on the website of the International Association of Genocide Scholars, right? Now, just think about this for a minute. The International Association of Genocide Scholars, as an organization, has claimed that Israel is committing genocide. This letter never acknowledges that. But to buttress its claim that Hamas was committing genocide, it cites one essay that was published on the website of this organization, while never acknowledging that the very organization whose website they are linking to has actually argued that Israel is committing genocide, right? That's what intellectual dishonesty looks like. And the third point about the letter is the use of this term blood libel, right? You could argue that you don't think Israel has committed genocide, but why on earth call it a blood libel, right? A blood libel. The term comes from the claim in medieval Europe that Christians made that Jews were using the blood of Christian children to bake matzah. That's where the term blood libel comes from, right? How can anyone seriously argue, right, that a claim of genocide that has been made by the International Association of Genocide Scholars, Israel's own human rights organization, B'Tselem, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, the most well-known human rights organizations in the world, Israeli-born Holocaust and genocide scholars like Amos Goldberg, Omar Bartov, Roz Siegel, Shmuel Letterman. This is the equivalent, you're claiming, of Christians in medieval Europe saying that Jews were using the blood of Christian children to bake matzah. It's just completely absurd. It's an example of just how far down the rabbit hole, this kind of establishment pro-Israel discourse has gone. And it's the use of the term blood libel is designed specifically to make this conversation not about what Israel, to turn it away from a conversation of what Israel's actually done and to force it, straitjacket back into this idea that the story here is a story of eternal anti-Semitism, which fundamentally never changes, in which Jews are always the victim of a Jew hating world, and therefore Palestinians and their supporters are simply the reincarnation of those Christians in medieval Europe who accused Jews of using Christian children to bake matzah, right? This narrative it becomes a way of basically not turning your attention away from all of the facts that you intellectually and morally should be having to face about what Israel has actually done and doing to Palestinians, and basically turning it in a direction that you can pretend that the real story here is the story of the fact that the world has not changed since the blood libels of medieval Europe. It's so dehumanizing towards Palestinians to put them in this position of the reoccurrence of the eternal anti-Semite. It so much denies them the right to have the dignity of their own story and their own experience that it is itself contributes this dehumanization of Palestinians by suggesting that they're the equivalent of the Nazis, that they're equivalent of the pogromists of Tsarist Russia, that they're the equivalent of the blood libelists of medieval Europe, itself is part of the process of dehumanization that makes what Israel did in Gaza possible and contributes to the possibility of Israel doing something like that again. That in this kind, by claiming that a claim of genocide made by the world's leading human rights scholars, some of whom are Jewish and some of whom were Israeli born, by claiming that that is a blood libel, what you are actually doing is a process of dehumanization that actually makes future acts of genocide against Palestinians more likely.